To our channel, $1 Million Made Easy. On this channel, we run numbers for people. We use the returns for the last 100 years for the S&P 500. In this video, we want to look at asset allocation along with percentage withdrawal. Most of us have heard about the 4% rule. So what we're going to do is just make up some numbers here. These aren't so important as the percentages. So say somebody has 1.2 million saved up, and they want to withdraw 4,000 a month, which would be 48,000 a year, which would be 4%. This is the percentage of withdrawal. So we're going to look at the 4% rule and the 5% rule, what you would be withdrawing a month. But we also want to look at the asset allocation because that's obviously important too. So what we want to do is use the numbers for every single year for the last 100 years to see how many times you might run into issues. And we're going to vary the asset allocation just to see how this might work out. So let's go ahead and run the numbers. Okay, these are the actual numbers. If you left it all in the S&P 500, which we're going to see that's probably not the best way to do it because when the market's going down, you don't want to take these amounts out of your S&P 500. It's already being knocked down anyway. You don't want to sell low. But I got a request for this. If we change the asset allocation, so we're going to change it to some different percentages. In other words, let's go with a 70-30 split, which means 70% staying in the S&P 500, 30% going over to some other bucket account, a cash reserve account, I call it. And let's just say it's paying 3%. Again, this might be considered a bond fund or whatever, but we can change any of these numbers. But let's just go ahead and see how many times this would make a difference. Right now, we got a 2% failure rate, which if you look right here, the only time you have a problem is 1920, 29, and 1930. Every other scenario, you're just fine. You can see it right here. This is what you'd have have left after 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. You'd have a 97.5% success rate over 20 years and a 2.8% over 30 years. So let's go ahead and change the numbers now to 70-30, and let's see how those numbers might work. It actually improved this situation, so you only have one time that you would have run out of money in the last 100 years. That's in, let's go ahead and see what the numbers are. I didn't run this ahead of time. 1929. Looks like 1929, you're running out of money. And let's see here. Just bear with me a second here. Looks like you're running out of money in the 22nd year. That's why it doesn't show up in the 20th year. It doesn't. So 100% of the time in the last 100 years with a 70-30 split, you would not run out of money except in the 22nd year. And again, we're talking about 1929, folks. Every other scenario, I love to show this graph. Every other scenario, you're starting with 1.2 million, you got 2 million, 4 million, and so on. So let's continue to run some numbers here. Let's go ahead and change this to somebody asked me to do our 60-40 split. So we're going to go ahead and update this, see if this changes this at all. Basically, it's not going to change anything. I know this from experience. It's just going to change these numbers a little bit, making these maybe more in the millions or whatever. But let's go ahead and run the numbers. Okay, we ran the numbers with a 60-40 split. 60% staying in the S&P 500, 40% going in cash reserve. And we've seen in the worst case scenario, which is 1929 depression type returns for all these years, that's the only time you run into problems. And let's see when you run out. Previously, it was run out of money in 22 years. Now it looks like you're running out of money in 24 years. So it maybe lasts a little bit longer with a 60-40 split, which kind of makes sense because you have less in the stock market. When the stock market's going down like this, you don't want much in the stock market. But folks, every other year with this 4% withdrawal rate, no matter what we change here, you're doing really well except for 1929 and 1930 numbers. Now, let's go up to a little bit higher percentage and see what might happen. If we go up to, let's just go to 45 when it should be 4.5%. Let's go back to the no, leaving all in the S&P 500. We just want to see what these percentages might be. As we change this withdrawal percentage, that's what we want to look at. How safe it is to raise this percentage a little bit. How many times? Again, we got this 2% situation over a 20-year period. It looks like 4.2% over a 30-year period. Let's look at the graph here over 20 years. Running out of money in 1928, 29 along in there. And it looks like the year 2000, we're starting to get a little bit iffy. We've seen this in previous videos. Year 2000, we had 3 down years in a row. Let's go ahead and look at this. You've got 20,000. You're down to 20. Remember, you start with 1.2 million. You're down to 20,000 after 20 years. In fact, the very next year, you can see this red right here. You're actually running out of money, folks. This is with us leaving it all in the S&P 500. Let's go ahead and do what we did before, doing the 70-30 split. Let's go ahead and update this. It's like we basically have the same kind of issues with the 1929, 1930, and also 1928. But I want you to notice, going with a 70-30 split, you have 157,000 left after the year 2000. Remember, 2000 was a problematic year where we only had like 20,000 left. With a 70-30 split, well, let's just see what it was. It's 20,317 with a 70-30 split. The only reason I'm looking at the year 2000 is that's the only time we have any problems with this issue with a 4.5% withdrawal rate. So we see we have a 70-30 split. You'd have 157,000. Again, these are approximations. That's how much you'd have left after 20 years. If we had returns, if we had these 3 down years initially and also down 37%, how much does a 60-40? Does it help or hurt with this after 20 years? We had 157,000. 138,000. How about an 80-20 split? 80-20 split. Look at that, folks. 300. That looks like the best split in this case. 80 to if, of course, nobody knows the future, but if we'd actually happen to have 3 down years, the best scenario you could have, if you knew that in advance, was leaving 80% in the S&P 500, having this 20% in the cash reserve. So these 3 years that when it's going down, you're taking this 54,000, 55,000, 57,000 out of the cash reserve. But then look how the market came back, folks. So you're actually the best asset allocation. If we knew in advance you were going to have these kind of returns, they leave most of it in the S&P 500, just enough to cover some down years initially. So a lot of people recommend, again, I'm not a financial advisor, but leave about 3 or 4 years worth of expenses in your cash reserve account, but leave a lot more in the S&P 500 because look how it came back. That's actually the best case scenario. And again, folks, these are the worst cases in the last 100 years. During the Depression years and during the year 2000, the 30-year graph, it's not going to help us any because we don't have 30 years since the year 2000. So we still got this one 20 years. Isn't that interesting? The 80-20 is actually the best case scenario. Let's go to a 5% withdrawal rate. Let's leave it all in the S&P 500. This is just, we're doing this for comparison's sake, and let's go ahead and update this. Okay, it looks like with withdrawing 5% of your initial sum, which is $5,000 in this case, you'd run into problems 5% of the year, 5% of the time. After 20 years, we see the same scenario, 1928, 29, and 30, and also the year 2000. Let's look at the actual numbers here. Here's the actual numbers for 2000. The money is gone in 16 years. Let's do an 80-20 split since we saw that was so beneficial last time. We do an 80-20 split. You're still out of money in 19 years. How about a 70-30 split? Out of money in 19 years. 60-40 split? Out of money in 18 years. 50-50 split? Out of money in 18. So it looks like because you had these 3 down years, once you get to a 5% withdrawal rate, you might have problems in the year if we have returns like the year 2000 where you had 3 down years in a row. But folks, every other scenario, I want to keep emphasizing that, you'd be just fine except in the Depression years and around the year 2000. So it looks like 5% withdrawal rate is okay in almost every scenario, 95% of the time, unless we would happen to have some consecutive down years, especially 3 or 4. 3 in this case in the Depression years. Of course, there was so much that happened after the Depression years, or after these first 4 down years. You had some more 3 down years. So in 1929, you were running out of money. In 17 years, that's with a 50-50 split. Out of money in 10 years if you had left it all in the stock market. Let's do the 80-20 here. Money's gone in 13 years. 70-30, 14 years, 15 years, 17 years. It's getting better. Why? Because the market was down so much. You don't really want to be in the market. But nobody knows the future. I like to run the numbers. More recent times, the year 2000, you see that's where we had some issues running out of money in 18 years with a 5% withdrawal rate. But somebody wanted me to run the numbers just to kind of go through here and see where you would be with different asset allocations. So here we see the money out of money in 16 years. Again, this is the worst case scenario. Most times you would be just fine. I can't emphasize that enough. Look at these numbers, folks. You're starting out with 1.2 million. This is 5 million. This is the after 20-year graph, by the way, if I didn't explain that. You'd have all kinds of money. These are the actual numbers you see going down through her after 20 years. You can see you could be in the millions of dollars here with this scenario, withdrawing 5%, leaving it all in the S&P 500. If we go ahead and change this to the 80-20. Again, I'm just looking at the year 2000 again because we saw that's the problematic year. Money's gone in 19 years. Money's gone in 19 years with a 70-30. With a 60-40, money's gone in 18 years. And again, as we saw before, you really want to have quite a bit in the S&P 500. If you figure it's going to be like it's done for the last 100 years, the market always seems to come back. These are the actual returns here, folks. The only time you really had some issues is 1929 and 1930, but look how even that came back. Came back 53%, 47, and 33. But here's the ones where we're looking at more recently. We had 3 down years. Well, look how it came back. So if you leave a higher percentage in the S&P 500, you can benefit from these kind of returns. But you need to have enough in your cash reserve account to survive, to outlast these numbers. You don't want this 60,000 and 61,000 coming out of your market when it's already going down. You don't want to sell low. But I just wanted to run the numbers. Somebody asked me to go ahead and run the numbers again. We see a 4 and 5% withdrawal rate. You're going to be just fine. The 4% you have are just fine when you have returns like recently as the 2000. The 5% is when you run into a little bit of problems where you're running out of money in 18 years. Again, like we've explained in other videos, obviously if you start out with some down years, you may have to go down maybe to 4,500 or something. Let's see how this might change as 18. Now you've got money left after 20 years. Maybe not a whole lot, but a lot better than if you took out 5,000. But if you're adaptable, if you can adapt to the market going down. If you did 4,000 a month, then you'd have all kinds of money left, 370,000 after 20 years. You can just see the importance of both the asset allocation and how much you're taking out. In this case, we were looking at the 5% rule. 4,500 would be 4.5, and this would be the 4% rule. So that's what we're looking at, changing these different asset allocations. But that's what we can do with this channel. We also could change the COLA. We left it at a 3% COLA. If you change it to a 2% COLA, let's go ahead and do that. Let's go back to the 5,000 where you're running out of money in 18 years. Watch what happens when we go to a 2% COLA. Now you got money left after 20 years. Maybe not much, but a lot better than running out of money after 18 years. But again, that's what we do on this channel. We run all kinds of numbers for people. Please tell people about this channel. Let them know there's a channel out there that will help answer some of these questions. We can change all kinds of different variables just to see where you might be. And instead of getting some kind of a graph, let me show you what I'm even talking about here. Recently, I saw this as a Monte Carlo, and I thought, that doesn't really tell me a whole lot. It tells me a little bit of the percentages. Okay, there was a bunch of people that ran out of money, but it don't tell me when. They don't show me the numbers. I want to see the actual numbers, and that's why I do what I do. Or here's another one, somebody running numbers. This is what you often get when you run a Monte Carlo. They have you change all kinds of different variables. I like to see the variables changed right in front of me and how it affects these numbers. And then I can give you a graph like this, just simple like that. Again, that's the way I like to do it. I like to run numbers. I like to use the actual historical returns, not a possible scenario with Monte Carlo. I just want to see where somebody might be in the future. So that's what we do on this channel, is run numbers for people. Again, please subscribe, please share, please like these videos. Let people know this channel exists, because I really want people to see these numbers both in the accumulation stage and the withdrawal stage and see where they might be. Thanks so much for watching.